What does St. Anthony of the Desert have to do with the fifth joyful mystery? Recently, I was listening to the testimony of a young man who has just began his religious life as a servant brother. And I remember we were sitting all around with the brothers there in Spain, and I asked at one point, what's going to be the thing that's most difficult for you to leave behind? What about becoming a servant brother the following day is going to be the most difficult? Like, what's going to make you cringe? Like, what's the hardest thing you have to do? He thought about it for a split second, and he said, leaving how do you say it? Not my uncle, it's my nieces and nephews. That's it, thank you. Leaving my nieces and nephews. This has to do with Saint Anthony, Marie Claret, Anthony of the Desert. Sorry, it's been a long day. This has to do with Saint Anthony of the Desert because when his example is very shocking because you think, okay, maybe leaving nieces and nephews is difficult, but it's even more difficult leaving your own brothers and sisters. In the case of St. Anthony of the Desert, he left, his own parents were already dead, and when he got the religious call to go into the desert, which is a pretty crazy call, like if you think like entering the servant brothers is difficult, imagine just being like, you know what, I'm going to go to the desert. It's a much more difficult. I know with some religious, and I'm looking at, I have, for anyone who knows him, Brother Greggy in front of me, when his dad went to see Prego, which is a monastery in Spain, it was not like he saw like Prego, the monastery, and he started like his eyes started to water up, and he started to say like, Brother Greggy's gonna be here. Anyway, he wasn't actually staying there. That actually wasn't where Brother Greggy stayed. It was in Las Presillas in Barthenia, which was a lot better. Doesn't look like Prego. But imagine if he actually did go not only into the desert of Prego, which is a deserted place, or if he was actually going into the desert, just like in the middle of like the rocks and living in a cave. Well, in the case of St. Anthony of the Desert, he actually did that. I don't know, I haven't sat down and asked St. Anthony of the Desert what was the hardest thing for him to leave, but one of the things he left was his sister. I don't know how old she was. I don't know if she was like 10, 11 years old. And he left his sister and sold the properties that he had and put certain religious ladies, nuns so to speak, in charge of his sister. I don't know about you, but when I heard that, I was like, that's got to be difficult. That's got to be like, oh, it's my sister, He could have thought of a lot of different reasons why not to leave his sister. It says that like Satan himself like made gold appear as he was like walking into the desert. Like there was actually rocks that like start to shine gold. The other day we were working and we saw a rock that on the back side of it had like a white crystal formation. I was actually tempted to be like, ooh, we're going to keep that rock. But imagine if like the rocks actually like start to turn to gold. Now ask yourself, would it be harder to leave your 10-year-old sister and go to the desert or to not grab a rock that became gold? I think the sister's thing actually might be more difficult. I think it might be more difficult. I think it's interesting also when you think of like how many others have gone through similar situations. I'm thinking of Sister Claire, for instance. With her family, there's a moment when she was thinking about it, and she was thinking, look, should I leave my sisters? Should I leave them? And the thought that came to her was, it's probably from another holy person, another saint. The thought that came to her was, it was as if the Lord was saying it, take care of my things, and I'll take care of yours. Take care of those who I love, and I'll take care of those who you love. Sometimes we think, oh, okay, Jesus is the example in suffering the passion, which is totally true. But he's also the example par excellence of leaving those you love in order to come closer to them. He is the example par excellence of being cold-hearted enough to go into the desert. But if you think Saint Anthony the desert is crazy, it's good to remember and always look at Jesus Christ, because he's not cold-hearted, he's not a stone, but he does do something which is even crazier. And that's the reason I'm referring to the fifth joyful mystery. Fifth joyful mystery, in case anyone is still trying to, from the beginning of the homily, was trying to remember what the fifth joyful mystery was. It's the finding of Jesus in the temple. First of all, he wasn't just found in the temple. He actually ditched his parents and hid in the temple. It's one of these things that we kind of found in the temple. Oh, that's good. No, actually it's pretty radical, because he would have done his bar mitzvah, where he actually becomes, at 12 years old is when they actually learn to read Hebrew, so they become of age. So in other countries it's 18, other times it's 21, but he becomes of age, and he does something which is revolutionary. He decides to not even tell his parents where he's going. So he literally hides in the temple. And he didn't have to tell them. But notice the fact that if he had told them, they wouldn't have suffered. They're like, oh, well, I'm going to stay in the temple. But he decides God's will for him. Do you not know that I must be about my Father's business? God's will for him in those circumstances was to stay in the temple, to not tell his parents and stay in Jerusalem. Because you think, oh, couldn't he just have told his parents? He could have. But what if it was the Father's will for him not to tell his parents, so that they would suffer? Wouldn't that be heartless? Jesus himself was preparing his own mother and Saint Joseph for the Passion. He was praying for Saint Joseph to die before that would all happen, and in the case of Our Lady, to be that type of separation, because a separation by passion is worse than going into the desert. And a child who hides, knowing that the mother is going to think the worst thoughts possible and doing it on purpose for love of God, for love of the Father and the salvation of men, I think it's impressive. Because he doesn't do it because he's heartless, and he doesn't do it because he's cold. He does it because he wants them to be holy. He wants them to love the Father, and he wants them to go not into the desert, but into the heart of God. And he's willing to suffer he's willing to make his own heart suffer because he wants the good of their heart. We're going to continue with the holy sacrifice of the Mass, and we're going to offer this Mass especially for all those who have recently decided to join the religious life, who have to leave family, that those who experience themselves being left may recognize that they're loved by God, and that those who are leaving might be like the heart of Christ. Amen.